Right. So we're going to get started. This is our first, well, there's going to be 7 of these discussions in this particular series where we'll cover the Yoga Sutras. But the beauty of the Yoga Sutras is it kind of links in with all the other texts. So I'm gonna, I'm just gonna do a brief. I've got a little presentation. I'm gonna dip in and out of it to explain things. But basically, Patanjali's Yoga Sutras were written in between 200 BC and 200 CE. We don't have an exact date as yet. And what Patanjali was trying to do in these Yoga Sutras was to summarize yoga in that period. So he was basically trying to summarize yoga philosophy that existed in the Upanishads, the Vedas, as well as quite a few tantric and oral texts. Tantric texts and oral teachings. He was trying to consolidate it or summarize it. And it was quite a challenge because apparently he was writing it so it would fit onto a single sheet of paper, so it was easy to transport. So basically he was just giving you the yoga crib notes. So he created these 196 aphorisms. That's just a summary of the philosophy of yoga. It's not a yoga manual. So it's not something that a yoga, you could actually read and actually understand the principles, but it summarizes the various parts or the various aspects of yoga. So we're just going to briefly look at how the sutras are divided. Does anybody know a bit about the sutras that wants to add anything or ask a few questions relating to the sutras? Does anybody have something that they want to know about to start with?
No.
Okay. Yeah, it is probably the best known. Sorry, did I have a question?
Was it Gita?
Yes, I think it was Gita. Okay, yeah. So basically 196 sutras divided into 4 chapters. And what we're going to do today is just talk about the overview of the sutras. So we're going to just get an overview. I'm going to explain what the chapters are about. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the first chapter. And I think then yoga starts to make a lot of sense. So I'm just going to screen share and move on to, okay. Right, a little bit of what I've already covered, written between 200 BC and 200 CE. And Patanjali was a sage, but there's no reason to believe that he was actually a yogi or he actually practiced what he was saying in depth. He did obviously have a very, very clear understanding of the first bit, the first part that we're talking about today, the Samadhi Pada, or the first chapter. But in terms of the remaining chapters, he seems to have summarized details from other texts, but there's no reason to believe that he'd actually done it all. Now, so it's very important to understand that he was a grammarian. He was interested in language. He was also very interested in consolidating huge bodies of information. So he was very, the texts that he's known for are basically summaries of other much larger texts and much larger philosophies. Now, the sutras was designed to fit on a single sheet of paper, 196. Sutras are aphorisms, so they're very short summaries of an idea. And this is why 196 aphorisms, and yet it has, when they've written commentaries on it, it's been huge volumes because they're so succinctly summarized and they can allude to so many aspects of yoga. So hence he's wrote it in a way that encourages discussion. Now, the sutras are divided into 4 chapters, 4 main parts. I'm just going to briefly go through these 4 main parts. Okay, so the first chapter, chapter 1, basically has 51 sutras, and we're calling it a chapter, but the way he wrote it, it wasn't a chapter, it was these sutras written in various parts. And the first part he called Samadhi Pada, right? And it alludes to what Samadhi is, and we're going to discuss it. It alludes, and it also talks about the obstacles. He also, the most important thing in this first chapter is he tells us what yoga is, or what the scriptures say that yoga is. So that's quite interesting, and we're going to talk about that a little bit. But then he goes on. So what happens is when you understand what Patanjali describes as yoga, and it's very, very simple. And he says, well, if you already practice yoga, then that's it. You practice yoga. However, if you aren't able to practice yoga, then he lists these other padas. Now, the sadhana pada, the chapter 2, is actually the 8 limbs of yoga. It's only described in the second chapter. And of the 8 limbs of yoga, asana is one of them. However, currently we practice just the one limb, which is just one part of one chapter or within the Yoga Sutras. So it's just, it's quite a comprehensive script or number of aphorisms, but the sadhana pada is basically what a lot of us think of as yoga. Okay, and then the third chapter, the Vibhuti Pada, is the benefit. So if you A, achieve Samadhi, or B, practice the 8 limbs of yoga, the Vibhuti Pada tells you all the benefits that you will enjoy, samyam, parinamas, siddhis, etc. And we will discuss that in one of the later discussions. And then the 4th chapter is your Kaivalya Pada. That talks about liberation. Now, in terms of the entire Yoga Sutras, it's only the last 34 chapters, or 34 sutras, sorry, in the last chapter that actually speaks about liberation and what Patanjali means by liberation. So we're just going to move on to the first. So chapter 1, Samadhi Pada, Sutra 1. And I'm not going to go through the Sanskrit terms because it may get confusing. So I've listed the Sanskrit terms. Those are the numbered ones. And and what's directly below each number is what it translates to. So the first one is, here is yoga, or this is the teaching of yoga, right? And the second one is the most important one, where he explains what yoga is. And also, all Patanjali says is yoga is the restriction of the movement of the mind. That's it. That's yoga. Yoga is stillness of the mind, or restriction of movement of the mind. Because the aim with yoga is not to create stillness. It's to do nothing and allow the mind not to move. Does anybody have any questions about this? Because this is it. If you understand this, you got yoga, and you don't have to worry about the rest of the sutras or anything else. Yoga.
Just do nothing.
Just do nothing, but allow your mind to be still.
Okay.
Yeah, so basically that's it. That's the essence of yoga. And we're going to come back to yoga chittavritti nirodha. We're going to come back to this very, very often, because basically this is it. This is yoga. If you understand yoga's chitta, vritti, nirodha, then you understand it all. You've got it, right? And then we're going to move on to the next 2 chapters, right? Because then he says that when this is achieved, when you've got the stillness of the mind, then the witness comes to exist in its true identity. Basically, the witness is you, or the witness is each individual. So when you can achieve the stillness of mind, then only can you achieve your true identity. Any questions? Any thoughts? No? Okay. Now, Sutra 4 is, if you don't achieve the stillness of mind, the witness, that's us, will assume the identity of everything that moves in the mind. So whatever comes into the mind is what influences our behavior, whether we are conscious to that movement in the mind or unconscious. It's influencing our actions, it influences our identity, it influences everything about who we are. Okay. And then he goes on to explain in the 5th sutra, he goes on to explain what the movement of the mind is and how it can be divided into 5 categories. And if you understand what these categories are, they can either bring you affliction or they can free affliction, right? But for as long as the mind is moving, you can either suffer or you can learn to deal with your suffering, but you can't actually be free. This is the essence of what he's saying. Okay. Now, the 5 movements of the mind, or the 5 is proper judgment, pramana, false assessment. Now, vikalpa is uncertainty. But remember, we use intention in some of the other practices, which is sankalpa, which is the opposite of that. We use sankalpa to get rid of the vikalpa. Sorry, that's just the Yoga Nidra group. And then Nidra, sleep, and the remembrance of things past, so memory. So the 5 movements of the mind are judgment. It's either proper judgment or incorrect judgment, false assessment, uncertainty, sleep, and memory. And then he goes on to explain this. Now he lists this in the following aphorisms, but what I've done is just done a quick summary, right? He says proper judgment comes from direct perception, logical inference, and revelation, right? So in order to judge something correctly, you have to perceive it directly yourself. You have to understand this yourself. Or you have to come up with a logical inference. It has to make absolute sense to you. Revelation is from a trusted source, right? So it could either be scriptural or from a relevant teacher. And this is where the choice is yours as to who you choose to believe or not believe, right? The false assessment means misunderstanding or misapprehension of an object. So not observing something well enough and misapprehending. Uncertainty, this is a very important one when it comes to yoga, and it'll come up again and again when we discuss the 2nd chapter. He talks about uncertainty arises when knowledge is based on words alone and there's no objects to perceive. Hence yoga, when they start saying, well, if you're not understanding all of this, then it has to be a very physical practice. You have to create something that you can actually feel and you can perceive. So you start, this particular sutra becomes very, very important in the next chapter, etc. Now, sleep, and this is where the Yoga Nidra bit comes in. Sleep is when the movement of the mind has no object to focus on. It doesn't mean that the mind is not moving, unless you learn how to stop the mind from moving in your sleep. But sleep is the only time when the mind moves without us focusing on the movement. Hence, we cannot sabotage it or, cause an incorrect judgment or a false assessment, because when we're asleep, we're not in charge of the focusing. It's where the unconscious can spill its content. And remembrance is memory. It's where things of, where we experience of a past is retained, and this can actually cloud our vision. And in fact, research actually shows that memories cloud our vision because we don't think. Sorry. Hello. Hi. Sorry. Okay. So memories cloud our vision because we don't see things as they are. We see things as we imagine them to be, and imagination is very often based on previous memories.
So Natasha, just a quick one on that. Does that mean it's telling you to forget the past? I'm getting a bit confused.
Yeah, so what it's doing is it's saying that understand that the past influences your mind. And if you truly want to view something objectively, you have to learn to forget the past. Otherwise, your past is going to cloud it. You're not going to see something objectively because your past, your memories are always going to cloud it.
But your experiences determine how you view the present, surely.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Your experiences are your memories. And whether it's positive or negative, it clouds how you're viewing something now. This is a very interesting discussion, Seema, because this is what we're saying in yoga, you know, and you'll see as we discuss it, you know, as we move on today, that, you know, things that we think of in the modern world, like we have to remember this and we have to remember that. And so often those very same things become our limitations. So what they're saying is, you know, in terms of remembrance, you have to understand that it is also a limitation. Sometimes it can be helpful because you know that a lion is dangerous, but lots of other times it can actually prevent you from learning information that's new.
So, Natasha, does that mean what you're saying is that actually a child is
Yes.
more likely to have proper judgment because they have less memories to cloud their judgment and
Definitely.
vision?
A child has not proper judgment. A child is more likely to see an object clearly. You see, because a child doesn't judge because our judgments are based on our memories as well. But when it comes to
Natasha,
yeah, go ahead.
sorry, is this along the lines of you've got to just live in the present almost?
Yes.
Not let the past or anything affect you. You're literally in the moment.
Exactly. This is what mindfulness is alluding to. That you have to be fully in the present moment. You have to let go of the past. Completely let go of the past. So do we have any other questions or anything else that you'd like to add? Because this is interesting. I think that when we get to this bit, because this is telling us how our brains work, and then it actually then throws up a lot of things that come up later on.
Can I ask you what the relationship is between number 3 and number 4? Because number 3 says uncertainty when there's no object to perceive. And then number 4 is talking about sleep when there's no object. So they're both talking about states when there's no object.
Yeah.
So is there something there about sleep being about uncertainty, or what's the relationship between 3 and 4?
So 3 and 4 is when it's conscious. Uncertainty, you realize, when knowledge is based on words alone and there's no objects to perceive. So you're conscious of those words, but you have nothing to base it on.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas sleep is unconscious, there's no object to focus on, so you can't bias it by your conscious thoughts and previous memories, but it will be your unconscious that will actually come through. So in both those cases, there's nothing to focus on, but it can be misleading, you know, like misinterpreting your dreams or not understanding where things are coming from can often lead to confusion.
Mm-hmm.
But one is conscious confusion, the other one is unconscious confusion, but both are confusing.
So then to go back to the definition of yoga, which was the restriction of the movement of the mind, so is the goal of yoga to somehow restrict all of these 5?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So
so all of these are the 5 movements, and yoga is saying that we have to restrict all 5 of these movements. So this is him just explaining what the 5 movements are. Yeah.
And so, you know, this would be Patanjali drawing on all the understanding that this comprises all the different ways the mind can move. And so all of the movements of the mind are captured here.
Yeah, so these are all the movements of the mind. Mm-hmm. By so when we look at Indian philosophy, there's various schools, and this is the Samkhya school and the Yoga school that had the most number of ways of perception. So this covers the 5 ways of perception, how we, how we perceive and how the mind moves, how the mind works. So this, according to Patanjali, this is everything included. And if we break it down, then it does cover, attention, etc. Because, the first one comes from direct perception, which is, in order to have direct perception, you need to learn how to use your attention. So yeah, it covers what this does. If we break down each one, it covers all the cognitive functions that we have come to understand.
It's really interesting because it's such a strange way of thinking about how we think. It takes a while to take it in that what it's saying is all the different ways we think are captured here. Is that right?
Definitely.
Yeah.
And so the reason it's interesting and the reason I wanted to present it this way, in the way he presented it, is because the way we think about how we think currently it's expansive. We think about where we think and we open a few more loopholes, so wormholes open up. So any one thing about how we think about it opens up more ways of thinking, more little wormholes. Whereas Patanjali is saying all of that has to collapse into itself. You have to think of nothing. So it's almost the reverse of what we currently do.
Does he go on to say what you get once you've done this?
Yes, he does. And that's what the 3rd chapter is all about. We'll talk about it here as well. I think we're coming up to it. So shall I move on? Because we can always come back to these slides because we will have to refer to this again and again. Yeah. So this is it. I'm now jumped off a few sutras. We've gone on now to Sutra 12. We talked about how to restrict the movement of the mind, right? And the restriction of the movement of the mind is achieved through regular practice and dispassion or renunciation. Now, in the sutras, they use the word vairagya. And vairagya gets translated as renunciation, but what it actually is dispassion. I think we have a few Sanskrit speakers here, or is Parvati here now? But yeah, so this is it. But we talk, it always talks about, the sutras is all about renunciation. But what he means is more dispassion than renunciation. So what he's saying, the movement of the mind can be restricted through regular practice, and he's going to tell us what the regular practice is, and dispassion. And now we're going to go on because he explains these things, right? Now, regular practice means the exertion required to achieve the steadiness of the mind, to achieve the state of non-movement of the mind. And Sutra 13 ties up directly with a much later Sutra 22. And he says, as a person is leisurely, moderate, or intense in their practice, so excellence is accordingly. So it's all about the amount of effort that you put into your practice to achieve the steadiness that will give you rewards. So you can achieve it if you put in the regular practice. And he tells us what the practices are as well, right? And now then we'll move on quickly to the renunciation or dispassion. Is self-mastery that removes hankering. A hankering is craving anything material. And then, that's Sutra 15. And then he talks in Sutra 16, he talks about superior dispassion or renunciation arises from the realization of Purusha. Now, when we talked about Samkhya, if you realize the universal, if you realize Purusha, where there's this universal oneness, then you won't hanker. In that state, you won't need things. You won't need material things because you realize that everything dissolves into one. So that's superior renunciation. But renunciation on an inferior, so you're thinking about this is top-down, bottom-up processes. Bottom-up is learn to become dispassionate. And the top-down process is if you understand Purusha, if you understand the universal oneness, the superconsciousness, then you're going to, from a top-down process, you're going to get to the same place because you will be dispassionate. And then he goes on to talk about the obstacles, and Seema, we are coming to the benefits next, but let's talk a little bit about the obstructions first. So the obstacles that distract the mind are illness. And it's very wide when they talk about illness. It's any disharmony in the body. So that's what it translates to. And when you think about what they mean by illness, it is when homeostasis is disrupted, when our circadian rhythm is. So it's very, the way it's explained is very related to sort of the autonomic functioning. So that's what they mean by illness. By lethargy, doubt, inattention, apathy, indulgence, failure to keep one's understanding grounded. This is it. You have to, these mental practices have to be grounded in the body, and also the lack of consistency in practice. And, the only thing is, the only way you can overcome these obstacles is with regular practice, unless you already can still the mind and you already understand Purusha. And then he goes on to talk about the benefits of a clear mind. When the movement of the mind ceases, it becomes like a clear gemstone. It reflects the form of the perceiver, the process of perception, and the object of perception. Now, this state is known as Samapati. So, Seema, this is it. This is what he says. In order, if you can achieve that complete stillness, if you can achieve that complete mindfulness in the moment, where the past does not affect your current moment, then your mind becomes like a gemstone. And then you have the ability to understand. You reflect the form of the perceiver. You know who you are. You understand how you are, the process of perception, how you're taking in this new information that's not clouded by your past memories, by your expectations, by your wishes and desires. So you actually understand your process of perception. And when you understand the process of your perception that is unclouded, then only then can you truly understand the object of perception.
How does one reconcile all of this with modern life when we've got a house, cars, luxury goods, yeah, anything?
So it's simple, he says, nowhere does he say you have to give up. And this is where this whole thing, where it becomes, is it renunciation or is it dispassion? Because what they are saying, if it's a renunciation, if you want to read Vairagya as renunciation, then it means you have to give all of that up. If you want to understand it as dispassion, then it means we can have all these things, but we should not need all these things, because anything that we need that we can't do without becomes a limitation.
Natasha,
yeah,
isn't that a bit like the Buddhist philosophy? A little bit.
Very, very similar to the Buddhist philosophy. Very similar. Now this part, because this is one
I was
word.
wondering, why it sounded similar, and that's what it strikes me as.
Now, so this is the one word, Samapati. Samapati is a word that got added on into some of the Mahayana Buddhist texts. So they use exactly the same word to get clear mind.
Yeah.
And, and then he goes on to explain this state, of Samapati. Samapati is a realm of infinity that is neither conscious nor unconscious. So it's where you are open, you're not just forcing things to happen consciously, whether it's based on correct judgment or incorrect judgment. And neither are you allowing your unconscious behaviors, habits, to influence you. It's where you've cleared both. And when you realize that when you clear all the conscious and unconscious habits, then you've cleared the karma. So this relates to exactly the same. So Samapati is where you're neither conscious nor unconscious. You're just able to perceive it all clearly. Does that make sense?
So in Samadhi, you've actually ceased all those different 5 kinds of movements of the mind. You've trained yourself to just cease those.
Yes, that's it.
And for most people, that would only be something they could do for short periods of time.
Yeah. so that's, so it depends on how you want to, that's where it depends on how you want to live your life, because we know some, we know some monks that achieve this and they live in the state of samadhi. We also know that we can achieve this in our lives. And it's about how, if we can achieve it in one moment and we train ourselves to do it, then we can use it at will at any point in our lives to overcome limitations. So, this is, you can either choose to live in this state, or you can choose to achieve the state so you can use it at will.
I like the phrase dispassion about things, because that will just make you a bit more at peace with the world and life in general, I think.
See, when I read the sutras, when I read it, I read the Vairagya as dispassion. And when we go to the 4th chapter, Kaivalya, this is for the really, really serious people, the ones who really want the liberation. Then that's where it can become renunciation. But definitely in the first 3 chapters, he's not talking about renunciation. He's not saying you have to give it up. He's saying you just have to, and it's not Patanjali saying that. He's summarized what the previous text is saying, which means you just cannot allow these things to control you. Anything that you need and you can't do without controls you. And if anything controls you, you are the slave to it.
Would you say that it's easier to become more dispassionate about things if you already have them? And if you haven't got our level of luxury and comfort, then it's a little bit more difficult to become dispassionate about something that you are striving for and haven't got.
Well, see, this is it, because if you are striving for it, it means you're not dispassionate.
But isn't it easier if you're already there, if you already have that state?
So, I mean, this is the question we need to ask ourselves. Is it easier to have something and give it up, or do the guys that, joined the monasteries in childhood and are monks for life and have renounced everything who've never known it, is it easier for them?
Yeah, if you've never had it.
Exactly, if you've never had it.
Pleasure is, or whatever that feeling, that thing brings you.
Yeah.
I've heard it said that many Indian men living in India, all of a sudden at age 60, suddenly decide that it'd be quite a good idea to become dispassionate and a renunciate when they've already lived their lives.
So that's in terms of a later Hindu text and Hindu philosophy, where we got the 4 stages of life, ashrama, and there is, the thing is you're first a student, and then you're a householder, and then you can choose to give it all up. At retirement age, you give it all up, and that's when you focus on your liberation. So that pertains to that aspect, which is a Hindu philosophy. And then when it comes to that stage of life, it becomes very similar to the yoga teaching.
It's kind of similar to the hierarchy of needs, isn't it? What you're saying is actually, once you've achieved all those bottom levels, it's really easy to then move up to the top levels. If you're still struggling to feed yourself, to feed your family, then it's more of a struggle to achieve these levels anyway, because you've got such a biological drive. That's what you're saying, isn't it?
No.
Not you, Natasha. Sorry, I don't know his name. Yes. The guy with the. That's what he's saying. Yeah.
So I think so, isn't that what you're saying?
Yes, the way that you're describing this, I prefer to look upon it as that we are already there, that we are no thing, and we've got to realise that in our present state and wherever we are. It's not going through stages. It's a realization of, well, wow, I'm there.
Exactly. So this is what, this is what this first chapter of Patanjali Sutras, this is what the Samadhi Pada, where he starts with is, we should all know that, that there's all one, it's all universal, there's a oneness, there's this Purusha, there's this underlying consciousness, and that's the only reality. We're already there. And we all are it. We all are made of it. We just don't realize it. And if you can just realize it, then you don't have to hanker, you don't have to crave, you don't have to get it, you don't have to work towards it. You already have it. And and he's saying if you already have it, then you got it. Then you don't have to worry about yoga. Whatever stage in life, whether you've had it, whether you've never had it, whether you're a 5-year-old child who realizes it, or whatever your age may be, if you understand this, if you get this, then the craving goes away and you won't need to strive towards it, towards anything, towards striving towards liberation or striving towards material achievement, because you already realize that there's nothing to achieve.
Natasha, one of the things I'm finding hard to balance here, and with hearing this, is actually your strive to find the truth through science, and you're not only yours, but many of ours. You're then reliant on the work, on the memories, on the empirical evidence, hundreds and hundreds of years behind you. If you're able to free yourself of that history and that judgment, how can you marry that with yoga's dispassionate freedom from memories? It seems so different from with just passion. How can you strive for the betterment of society or science, whatever it is?
What's the key to science, to a good scientist?
Objectivity.
Yes, to be the unbiased observer.
Yeah. Yes, true.
Yeah.
But you also need many years to build upon as well. You need the memories, the experience.
Yeah, but you also need to achieve a state where the past is not going to bias you. So that's what you need, that clear vision where you can have the correct knowledge, you can have the correct judgment, but you're not allowing memories and limitations to bias you. And you see, if you're too attached to any of those memories, then you are not a good scientist. If we're too attached to our own theories, it means we stop being a scientist. Because we're no longer unbiased. Does that make sense?
I totally agree. Actually, if you derive things as first principles at every point in time, I think it is yes, there's many benefits.
Sorry, does that mean some people are already much further, much wiser than others? There are some people to whom material things don't matter a lot. There are some who aren't that passionate already. They just are. Whereas some of us, just material things seem to matter much more to some of us. So then are people at different stages already? Are people just born at different stages then?
Definitely. This is what he's saying. There's some people, for whatever reason, they just are not material. They just are more able to see underlying reality, and their value system is not based on a material value system. They just see the world differently.
Yeah. A lot of these people seem to also be fairly dispassionate.
Yeah, definitely. So, the thing is, what they're saying is, if you understand how everything dissolves into exactly the same thing, then there's no reason to crave one thing over the other. Because it's the same. Exactly the same. And this is where, he goes on towards, so the first chapter is only 51 sutras, right? And in sutras 47 and 48, he talks about when one attains sorry, it's supposed to be not when on, when one attains perfection in Samapati, free from conscious reflection, one gains realization of Rita. Now, Rita is a word that's very, very commonly used in the Vedas. It has, in later Hindu texts, it's been sort of superseded by the word dharma. But what Rita is the natural order which regulates and coordinates the operation of the universe and everything within it. And when, in the sutras, Patanjali goes back and uses the word Rita. He does not refer to dharma, even though the Mahabharata, which has the Bhagavad Gita, was written before the Yoga Sutras. And in that particular text, they talk a lot about dharma, which is your role within society, your the things you have to do on a societal level. Patanjali goes back to the original yoga text and he talks about Rita, which is understanding the underlying reality, which is something that comes up and again in the yoga text. And this is where yoga and Hinduism and Buddhism, have lots of very common grounds. But when it comes to the essence, yoga will always go towards Rita, natural order, which is almost scientific. If we think about modern science, very secular, whereas dharma, etc., depends on your order or your societal rules or your cultural norms. So yeah, so basically this is it. We've covered chapter 1. This is essentially what he's saying. If you understand this, if you understand Rita, if you are dispassionate, if you've already don't crave material things, if your mind is still, if you can achieve deep states of meditation where your mind is absolutely still and you understand what it is, that universal oneness, then that's it, you've achieved yoga. You just practice that. Just stay in that, and that's all that you are. But what he goes on to say, however, if you don't understand this, then in chapter 2, he talks about the 8 limbs of yoga.
Okay.
So yoga is for if you don't get that, and this is where this is where when we talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Yeah.
Then this is where the 8 limbs and the hierarchy of needs start to map on. Because in chapter 1, he's saying if you've got Samapati, you've already got Samadhi. The mind's already still. So over the next couple of weeks, we're going to talk about these 8 limbs. Are we going to discuss them? Because they're also, especially the yamas and niyamas. Because in yoga text, there are no rules. There's no like, you have to do this or you have to do that. They talk about santosha, contentment, but then you have to understand what contentment means to you. This is the whole thing, is yoga is about, this whole, the yoga philosophy based on Samkhya philosophy is about you clarifying your perception, you letting go of those limiting memories so that when you have to make these decisions, you make the correct decision. So, yeah, I thought we'll just go through a few slides, but I used them all. And we have about 10 minutes. Yeah, let's chat.
I think, Natasha, society is very distorting on these objectives. So even if if you're striving for these, brought up to try and live like this somehow, I think society teaches you other things. All around you, there's constant pressures that push you in another direction. How do you overcome those pressures? They're not really materialistic. That's not one really. Especially with social media, etc. It's that pressure for self, for all of those sorts. I feel you know what I mean, Natasha. The pressures around us in society. push us in another direction and away from these.
So what he's saying is those pressures move your mind.
Yes,
So you have to learn how to not let those pressures move your mind.
totally. I agree. Any more insight? That's what I want to know. How do you stop those pressures? I think I'd find this easier to achieve in isolation. It's other factors around me that limit me.
Regular practice, Poonam.
Regular practice. Who was that?
That's
It's
Rekha.
true,
It is
but I want to know
regular
who told
practice.
me that.
Rekha, spot
Rekha,
on.
thank you.
Patanjali said that over and over again, regular practice, and not just playful, light-hearted, moderate, extreme, dedicated regular practice. That's the way, that's the only way to achieve this. If you want to live in the world. And, when we get to the 4th chapter, Kevalya, he actually talks about it. Renunciation is the easier path. It's easier to give it all up, sit in a monastery and meditate, because you can achieve this and you don't have the distractions. So, we think the monks have given up so much. They've actually got the easier life. Mm-hmm. It's us having to navigate between, achieving this and then coming back and, because even the truth is, and even when you are if you no longer have cravings, if you no longer have desires for achieving anything, when you still realize you may not want anything, but for as long as you are acting in the world, there are entanglements. So you may not want to achieve anything from your relationship, but you entangle yourself in all these things, relationships, and that itself is another thing. So as long as you're in this world, even if you've got the dispassion sorted out, and when we start talking about the different types of samadhis, you'll see, he talks about this. It comes up again in the 4th chapter. And this is where, you get like in Buddhism, you get this, you also get this in the Yoga Sutra, where they talk about people who took the Bodhisattva vow and the Jivan Mukti vow, because these are the people that have achieved it. And then they said, I've achieved it, I can live in bliss, but I'll go back to the world, I'll entangle myself in all these things, I'll have to go through all the pain, but I'll do it so that I can help other people. So this is where, they always talk about the Arahant and the Bodhisattvas. The Arahants who were sitting in isolation, they almost got it easy, because the guys who had to come back and teach and get entangled and be persecuted for what they were trying to teach are the ones that actually struggled more, even though they were not doing it for any personal gain.
Suppose you could become dispassionate through several stages in your life, minor dispassion. So I think I've achieved a tiny bit in terms of work. I was obsessed about work when I was younger, silly hours, obsessed about becoming a director, obsessed about earning tons of money. And then when Mum got ill, that element disappeared. So I suppose it's only when when life pushes you to a point, then you realize that actually things are not necessary, and that's when the dispassion comes in. I don't know.
See, that's just it. Life pushes us, and we become dispassionate in a really, really challenging circumstance.
Yeah.
When we also have the ability to become dispassionate in a very happy circumstance as well. In fact, it may actually be easier if we do it when things are controlled, than when we have so many other, difficult challenges to be dealing with, and then decide, well, I should, I achieve the dispassion at that point as well. So if we can achieve dispassion, yeah.
When you talk about yoga, you're not dispassionate. You are very passionate. And if you were passionate, you would not be able to motivate in the way that you do with your passion.
Yeah, so the thing is, for me, this is it. And this is why I say I can teach yoga, but it's very difficult for me. And that's why, but for my practice has to be very separate, because my yoga practice is dispassionate. And that people who've done lots of live classes with me know that when I go into my dispassionate stage, I stop talking to you, because I really, it's not that I don't care about the people around me, but I have no need to communicate. So it's, that's the challenge for me in terms of teaching. And it's why I struggle with teaching and then having to take time off and teaching and then having to disappear, because I need the dispassionate part of my yoga to actually be strong. My personal practice is dispassionate. That's my yoga, so that I can teach.
Is there something,
balance that?
is there something in the books or the teachings that say that what you're doing, i.e. teaching others, gets you to samadhi, gets you to the, gets you brownie points, if you like?
No, actually no, because at the end of the day, the only thing that gets you to samadhi is stilling your mind. So that's why I say the guys who are sitting in meditation, stilling their own minds, they get to samadhi much faster. You choose to go through the challenges, whatever they may be, because it's easier to just go to samadhi. You don't get it. You don't score brownie points. You don't.
So I'll tell you what I'm kind of wondering. Yeah. So I can understand what Seema said, where something major happens in your life, like a loved one, passes away or something, and that kind of gets you to take stock of your life and to think, right, you know what, certain things don't matter as much as something like a loved one. Yeah. But what I'm struggling with is, and I understand how yoga can be good for you physically. I do. What I'm trying to do is trying to marry the two, where I'm struggling how doing the downward dog is going to get me to get to that stage. Exactly. Natasha, do you see where I'm coming from?
This is why, the one thing Poonam will pick up on it, I get livid when people, think asana, when people allude just asana, one aspect, one small little bit in one chapter, one limb in one chapter, that's, because that's just it. So the asana, all asana is there to do is teach you physical discipline. It's correct. We talked about pain. We talked about disease, is to correct your posture so that when you're sitting or when you're standing or when you have to do some more severe meditative practices, you're not in pain. So asana is just there. Asana itself, you can do headstands every single day of your life. It's not going to get you the state. Yes, it may help you create the discipline required to sit in meditation. If you are willing to practice headstands and put yourself through that sort of physical pain, then meditation is very easy. But the actual being on your head is not going to get you here. It's completely a cognitive process.
Yeah, I remember in your classes you've actually said, we're just doing this so you can get and sit properly to do your meditation. I remember that was one of the...
So this is it. So for me, this is, I think this is important, is understanding that this is yoga, the stillness of the mind. This is yoga. Asana, the gym classes, that's physical postures to make you healthy. And that asana is not yoga.
So that's just the way to, that's just the means to get to.
Yeah. That's just, what they're saying. If you can't achieve this, if you can't sit still, really can't sit still, so you can't achieve the state of stillness of the mind, then we have to do asana. Now, maybe you can't sit still because you have tight hamstrings and they go into spasm. So then we have to tailor your asana program to loosen up your hamstrings. Maybe when you sit, you can't keep your spine erect, and hence, you have a little bit of a altered heart rate, etc., because of poor posture. Because you're not breathing correctly, your lungs are collapsed, etc. You're pushing up your heart rate. That's going to affect how well your mind works, how well so we need to ensure that we teach you asana to strengthen you so you can sit correctly. So we correct all the autonomic disturbances. That's the asana is just there for that.
So it's getting rid of all the hurdles. Sorry, Ruth.
No, but I find that one of the many things that I've really learned from doing your yoga course, Natasha, is that the way you teach, doing the physical practices helps me to still my mind, because you are always asking us to turn our minds to concentrate on different parts of our bodies. So that I found that your yoga practice, as well as training the body, it's helping me to achieve yoga in the sense of stilling the mind. So there's a mental discipline that you bring to our physical practices, which is absolutely invaluable, I feel, to my development of yoga, which I call yoga with a big Y, which is, you know, the Patanjali's yoga. So there's that aspect of the physical practices that you do.
So in terms of when I teach, and you'll notice this as we go through the 8 limbs, is that I include the asana, pranayam, pratyahar when I ask you to focus inwards. Also, when I ask you to focus and let things go, then we've got the dharana, which is the concentration. And we also try to get into, you know, when I ask you to shut your eyes, once you know the sequence, close your eyes so you can experience dhyan in your practice. So what I try to do is not just teach asana, but to teach all of the limbs. And you can't teach samadhi. Samadhi arises. I can't get you to still your mind. I can teach you the process. I can encourage you to practice. But when that stillness comes, it's only you that can achieve it. So this is for me, this is the important bit, is we have to bring all these limbs in together. You know, if we just practice asana and if we just do pranayam in isolation, and we don't bring it together, then we're not really training our body appropriately. So I do give a lot of instructions, but that's what I'm trying to do, is to bring all eight limbs in together.
That was a really good introduction.
Yeah.
So yeah, so next week we're going to talk about yamas and niyamas. And you know, my Sunday morning classes where I go through this is where yamas and niyamas come in, because it's the, you know, the basically it's the things we should do and the things we shouldn't do in order to balance our yoga practice. These are all the yamas and the niyamas are, do's and don'ts. But then too, it's up to you how you want to interpret each of those do's and don'ts. You have to, you know, the essence to yoga is you have to make the practice your own. This is the thing with yoga as well. As a teacher, you can only teach the practice, but once the person knows the practice is theirs. It's your yoga, and that's just it, where the small y becomes the big Y. As soon as it becomes big Y, then you're practicing your yoga. So yeah. I'm very, very pleased with myself. 1 hour.
Yeah.
As you know, timekeeping when I get into philosophical discussions are not my strong point. So yeah, so we can sign off. We can chat. You know, if you have any questions, we can go on, or we can pick this up again next week. I have put out the glossary. So if there's any words that you don't understand or anything of that sort, this is also being recorded today. So I will be able to share this video as soon as it's edited, if anybody wants to go back. And when I say edited, it just means that it's cleared out. Nothing will be doctored at all. So it's just meant to be raw footage. Yeah. So thank you guys. Thanks for joining me. I'm not sure if it actually live streamed on YouTube. It seems like it has, but I had to shut it down because I was getting feedback. So have a good evening. We'll see you tomorrow. No, I'll see some of you on Thursday. But yeah, good night.
Good night. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you
very much. Thank you.
Bye.